It's June 8th, Ukraine Media Center current form starts its operation. My name is Vasil Samokhvalov, and we start our day today with the first discussion topic: human rights protection during the war, challenges and needs for legal aid versus availability. Why is it important? What is it, and why is it actual? We'll be talking about this with our guests, Colonel Dmytro Borodavko, staff of the Territorial Defense Forces, Ihor Nikolaiev, the working group on the implementation of the norms of international humanitarian law and participation in the provision of legal services of the Territorial Defense Forces, Alexander Baranov, Coordination Center for Legal Aid Provision, Alexander Pavlichenko, Helsinki Union for Human Rights, Yaroslava Zvolinska, Right to Protection, and Vitaly Tisches, the working group on the implementation of the norms of international humanitarian law and participation in the provision of legal services of the Territorial Defense Forces. So let's not introduce ourselves in this long manner further on. Mr. Alexander is coming, and joining us is Alexander Pavlichenko, Helsinki Union for Human Rights. So let's start with Mr. Dmytro anyway. Why is it so urgent? What does it mean? Why did we gather here today? So please take the microphone. The floor is yours. Good morning, everybody. Today we have gathered to discuss an important issue: the implementation of the mechanism for free legal aid to our population, including the Territorial Defense Forces. I would like to say that Territorial Defense Forces is just a separate core of the armed forces of Ukraine, and their tasks and duties are stipulated by the law on national resistance. Also, the tasks vested in the Territorial Defense Forces is the defense of the territories and protection of population in certain areas, including protection against emergencies, mitigation of the consequences of combat operations, and legal aid as contemplated by the law on free legal aid. For the time being, we all know that due to the full-scale invasion of Russia, a lot of Ukrainians were affected, and in the vast territories, people need legal aid. This problem requires systemic solution. You know, the last act of ecocide committed by Russian Federation by detonation of the dam of the Kakhovska hydraulic power plant, which resulted in need for evacuation for a lot of people to safer areas, and now these people are facing a lot of problems which require systemic solutions in urgent manner. Thus, it's contemplated that the legal aid will be provided by relevant specialists, including the servicemen of the Territorial Defense Forces, in coordination with the employees of the free legal aid system, which means regional and central level specialists. So we work in coordination with the international government and non-government organizations. The servicemen who stay in the area of active combat operations will provide legal aid to the population which was affected by combat operations, which disables their connections with the centers of free legal aid, but thus their basic legal needs will be covered. So one of the areas that the servicemen of the CIMIC units will be fulfilling is the systemic work aimed at legal aid to the affected population. It requires a lot of attention, a lot of further discussion, so we should find more solutions and avenues of approach to make sure this system starts working. So before we give floor to Mr. Igor, so talking in simple words, here we're talking about the Territorial Defense Forces, which enlist a lot of lawyers who will be engaged in provision of legal aid to the population in coordination with the centers for free legal aid, which operate all across the country. Is that right? Yes. Yes, they will study the needs of the population at the places where the access of the civil specialists is unavailable. They will forward those issues to the civil specialists in the centers of free legal aid. So from the point of view of the troops management, it's already solved. There is the mechanism which allows engaging the servicemen. Well, this mechanism is being worked upon, and the relevant resolution will be approved in the end of this process. So let's give the floor to Mr. Ihor, who is enlisted in Territorial Defense Forces, who is a professional lawyer and who will tell us more about that. Good morning, dear colleagues. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we started facing a situation when a vast territory of our country ended up in the middle of the battle zones. This situation required immediate reaction by both civil authorities and military. In the areas where the central government bodies cannot fulfill their duties to the full extent, where the civil population is separated from the territory under the control of the Ukrainian governments, the Territorial Defense Forces also fulfill, I would say, complementary functions, the auxiliary functions that are aimed at reducing the sufferings of the civilians by providing all the necessary aid, both humanitarian and social. We started this work last year as a working group for compliance with the international humanitarian law and provision of the legal services that was created by the command of the Territorial Defense Forces of Ukraine. Our unit comprises legal professionals, advocates, prosecutors, who in their civil lives had a vast experience, and in the armed forces we continue applying it to fulfill the tasks that are contemplated for us. Our group worked in the areas of all active battle operations, starting from Kiev region, Chernihiv region, Poltava region, Sumy region, Kharkiv region, Luhansk region, the part under the control of Ukrainian government, Donetsk region, Zaporizhia direction, Kherson region, and the southern areas. Thus, we have accumulated significant experience. We work with the Coordination Center for Legal Support as a key player in this area, or key government body in whom the implementation of these policies are vested in. We've learned our lessons, we've made certain conclusions on regarding the ways our troops function in the complementary or auxiliary activities which are related to satisfaction of the needs of the civil population, or related to the protection of the civilians, protection of the cultural values, and different facilities which are protected by the government, by the Ukrainian law, and by the international humanitarian law. And as you've already mentioned, we've developed different mechanisms for different players, and to make that mechanism the most efficient possible, we proposed today's discussion to hear different specialists from different areas, different thoughts, and take them into account in this document and in our further activities. So let's proceed to Mr. Alexander, who is the director of the Coordination Center for legal aid. Mr. Alexander may tell us more about that. What are the problems that the centers may address? How can they engage the resource of the Territorial Defense Forces? Like, should they submit a written request, just allocate to advocates for me, something like that? Or like what? Thank you. Well, this question will be asked from you too. Well, thank you very much. The system of free legal aid continues working. We continue providing the primary legal aid, the consultations, explanations, and the secondary legal aid. We have representations in the regions. In the armed forces, we did not stop our operations since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Within the last 15 months, we continue providing legal aid to our customers, sometimes in gray zone, sometimes in occupied territories, temporarily occupied territories, or deoccupied territories, and the number of problems our clients are facing is huge. We provided more than 120,000 consultations on primary and secondary legal aid. So 8,000 of them accounted for secondary legal aid. First, we were going to document the war crimes, to document the facts of birth and death in the temporarily occupied territories. We worked on the compensation for the damaged and destroyed property, and people are facing the problem when the documents which confirm the title to such real estate were lost. And we're also solving a lot of other social issues like social payments, ailments, and stuff like that. A huge problem for us is the availability of our services to the people who are in just recently deoccupied territories or reside in the gray zones. Obviously, for those who reside in the temporarily occupied territories, it's extremely complicated. For them, we have such services as an option of placing a call through Telegram, because there is no other way that they can make a call to the center of the free legal aid, to the contact center. And contact center is a very convenient tool for any people who may call from any city to get the advice, the primary legal consultation or explanation what to do and in what manner. So to explain to what extent is this tool demanded, we provide more than 1,000 telephone consultations on a daily basis. That's a huge amount of work, actually. So getting back to our activities, we coordinate our activities with other bodies, and starting with such educational programs as issuing the brochures which explain what to do with your documents, which corroborate your title to property in case they were lost, for example, which is a very frequent issue. So here we work with other law enforcement agencies, and this synergetic work of ours, it allows people who end up in a difficult life situations to receive legal aid from us. Our coordination and cooperation does not end with civil population, and I hope it will continue in part of provision the legal aid to our military, because the military legislation is pretty complicated. There is a lot of issues that may result in criminal liability, and awareness of your rights and duties is very important for understanding by all the military what they can and cannot do. So we expect our cooperation to develop further on, and as well as our services, I mean the free legal aid, in terms of its availability, or in response to your question how it may work, we think that it will be a forwarding element, a linking element, when a lawyer, an advocate from Territorial Defense Forces provide primary legal aid. They are incapable of providing it to the full extent, or when the clients require secondary legal aid, they may be forwarded to the Center of Free Legal Aid, where the clients may receive such aid. Well, I understand it's a typical story. People lose their property, people have to submit applications, some reports about that, and they need somebody to help them, but there is no place where they could refer for help earlier, right? Well, it's honestly not a typical story, because it's a number of variations that may exist there. The most simple one, for example, if they were registered and they were on the register, that's the most simple story. But sometimes they may have documents at hand which were not registered in the register, or when the documents were destroyed and they have to be renewed or recovered, or for example when everything is destroyed, when even notary offices don't have copies, or Bureau of Technical Inventories don't have copies, or for example when people never drew up those property titles. They were living on their land, but they never processed it in a legal way, never registered it legally. So it's the issue of primary and secondary legal aid, the representation of clients' interest in the course. We explain everything that we can to the customers. So, but talking about Kherson, for example, we resumed the operation only of 2 bureaus in Kherson, in Berislav regional center. For the time being, unfortunately, we are unable to ensure the security of our specialists in the rest of the Kherson area, so we can't wait to be able to come back to the work in those regions. Thank you. So let's proceed to Mr. Alexander Pavlichenko, Helsinki Union for Human Rights. So what are the challenges, how it may help, how it may work, and where is the place for human rights specialists from civil sector in this work? Good morning. I would like to start with the word complementary that was already mentioned, that with our work we're also trying to complement those lacunas which are not covered by the central government level. We have 21 offices that provide legal aid, both primary and secondary legal aid, and we also try to react to those challenges that you've mentioned. Like Mr. Alexander already said, the main problems that we're having, we really have a huge problem with the fact that we work within the civilian framework legislation. It doesn't take into account the realities of war. What I'm talking about, the destruction of the documents and the requirement to provide all those documents that sometimes are even impossible to collect. And sometimes we have situations when in some towns or villages the documents, the property title was not drawn up in a proper legal manner, because such process was costing more than the property itself. It mostly happens in rural areas and people were living there. But if such tragedy happens as the detonation of the dam of Kakhovka HPP, when the dozens, maybe hundreds of the land plots and properties are destroyed, so I think that the government should adopt some legislation which will solve the situation, how to find a way out of this situation, so that the people don't run around with all those procedures where it's virtually impossible and it's a double loss for them, you see. I think that I think it's very good that this issue is being touched upon by the military, who have more access or better access to the territory, and the matter of trust to the military is a very important element, and this element of reinforcement of trust through provision of social and legal services it will be yet another plus, another advantage, which will allow considering this work efficient, but still we have to get back to it in a couple of years to see to what extent it was implemented, because currently we're at the start. We are ready to get our resources engaged to make sure that the system of free legal aid, where we have contacts, where we have opportunity to provide such legal aid, so that we take maximum effort there. But we don't only work with the civilians, we also work with their military, with the retired military. We work on the issues of disability and fulfillment of all the procedures related to the identification of the disability status. That's yet another layer of problems. There are also the issues with violation of the legislation in the armed forces, including Territorial Defense Forces, which remain a closed shop. Saying it in English, it's like a closed community where the crimes do not always surface. Sometimes they stay inside. They may be simulated as an act of suicide, for example. It's a big problem too, because we're saying that there should be justice, so justice should exist in all levels, including in army. It's always difficult, not always convenient, but it should be a goal, and we continue working for it. I appreciate this proposal to work together. We are ready to join, to add our resources, and we have quite a good experience with our colleagues from the non-government sector to get involved in this type of work. And when the problems are not solved on the national level, we switch to strategic level. We work with international organizations, including European Court for Human Rights, which reviews the strategic cases, the bodies of the United Nations organization, including International Criminal Court, and we hope that this aggression tribunal will be created, but that's a whole different issue, and still we can work there together. And a bit more about the complicated way of cooperation between the government and the military. Ms. Yaroslava will tell us what are the challenges, what are the difficulties that you're seeing. Good morning. I would like to start with telling you that our organization, the Right to Protection, acts as a separate organization starting from 2013, and in fact we provide both free legal services and social services and information services as well. Since the topic of today's conversation is legal aid, I would like to stop at those formats of cooperation that we consider for ourselves as of now, specifically in the area of legal aid for the people who are in close proximity to the area of active battles and in other insecure areas. I would like to focus your attention on the remote format. I mean, the provision of legal consultations on a remote basis. We have quite a broad experience in this field, because even before the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we had a hotline in place. And after the 24th of February, the ways of provision of legal consultations, remote consultation, got diversified. For the time being, we have three such ways. First is the phone hotline, which operates starting from Monday through Friday. You only have to have access to the mobile communication means to get online. We also have remote consultations by our lawyers. It's done through this special Google form that is being filled by a person, and a lawyer gets in touch by themselves. And the third way is a Telegram channel, which functions more than a year now, people may get quite a prompt answer to their questions there, but at the same time I have to focus your attention that it's all mostly related to the primary legal aid. For example, if people need some explanation regarding their rights and duties, or for example when we have to give people an advice how to act in this or that situation, to provide them with the context of the notary or somebody of this local government, for example. But when we're talking about the secondary legal aid, like submitting a report, submitting an application, taking a case to the court, we have the way out of this situation too, but it also requires internet. Is being done on a remote basis. If people can do it with internet, they may forward necessary legal documents to a lawyer, and lawyers from original offices which are established almost in all the big cities in Ukraine, well, those documents are being processed by lawyers. Our lawyers cover a broad scope of different issues like labor issues, social payments, family law, as it was mentioned. Now there are a lot of urgent issues to be solved regarding the damaged and destroyed property with further compensation. So basically all the matters related to the war. Also, I would like to mention that we are ready to provide direct consultations. I mean, our customers, or I'm sorry, our lawyers, upon coordination with the security of our foundation, are ready to go on a mission from our offices in Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro, Sumy, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, to go directly on spot to the location and to provide relevant advice there. So this is the format of cooperation that we also consider, and it will be our pleasure to cooperate. Hanna Ovdiyenko, legal expert of the Kharkiv Human Rights Group. Good morning, dear colleagues. It's my pleasure to be here. I would like to tell you more about what we do now and how we could cooperate with the defense forces and any government authorities. We are always open, first of all, to this cooperation. It's always our pleasure, no matter whether it's official or non-official, based on the arrangement that we work with the security service of Ukraine and other law enforcement agencies, and it will be our pleasure to work with the defense forces. For the time being, we already work in a number of legal areas, so to say, and starting our work with the beginning of the war, we were realizing that we don't have enough resources to cover everything, so we decided to cover the most difficult areas. We work with the people affected by the war crimes. Our main scope of work is the application to the International Criminal Court, and in case the specialized tribunals will be established, we will apply to them. Regarding the violation of international humanitarian law by Russia, we believe that we will be able to bring Russia to liability, including the military command, specific servicemen, with relation to the maximum number of war crimes possible. So we work with the affected persons, those who were suffering from artillery shelling or rocket artillery shelling. We work with the injuries, with the victims of tortures and rapes. We work with the relatives of those missing in action and those back from captivity. We mostly focus on the civilians, but we also provide a legal aid to the servicemen who experience physical violence while in captivity as they come back. We think that this aid should be provided in a complex manner. It's not enough to receive only the support of the lawyer. We work all across Ukraine. We allocate advocates. We have offices in Lviv, Kiev, Kharkiv, and we are about to establish an office in Mykolaiv shortly. And if we make it, we plan to have 10 offices in total established for our project. And we believe again that this aid should have complex nature. We should be providing not only legal aid but other types of aid too. We provide psychotherapists which provide the necessary number of therapeutical sessions, and we also provide humanitarian aid as money disbursements. So thus we try to cover three basic needs: the need for mental health, physical well-being, in our case it's a financial aid, and legal aid in documenting of evidences of the war crime and submission them to the international court. In this context we will be happy to cooperate, and because we make our missions to Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv regions, we also plan missions in Mykolaiv region, I mean the field missions, and we are ready to cooperate in this area. Our main goal is the collection of evidences, safe, I mean apart from the individual cases. So we would like to work in coordination with our colleagues, maybe make some joint mobile teams, working teams, which will be developing the strategy for work on documenting of the violations of international humanitarian law by Russia. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vitaly Titich. We are getting back to the practical side of the coin. What you said, that territorial defense may work in cooperation with the government in provision of this legal aid is good news. It's something that may be of interest to the people. So how this coordination should be happening, what are the points of touch? Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. It was very interesting to listen to the colleagues with whom we worked earlier. I'm an advocate. I have an experience of 25 years. I was working with International Criminal Court and other human rights organizations. Something that I was not doing before is a free legal aid. Free legal aid under the law on free legal aid. So within the last 10 years it was a pro bono activities, but pro bono in no way overlaps the mechanism of free legal aid. It's a government mechanism. So if you allow me, I will remind you what are we talking about here in general, because it seems a little bit vague. So we're talking about the way the government ensures its positive duty on the provision of free legal aid to all the citizens of Ukraine who are under the protection of the government. So no circumstances, according to our constitution, are serving as premises to limitation of their rights. So the government should ensure the right to the free legal aid to the extent contemplated by the law. As Mr. Alexander said, the government was not ready in institutional and legislative way. Our legislation did not contemplate situations like the one we ended up in. For example, the situation with the provision of free legal aid. The legislator made amendments which allowed to provide the legal aid in the system of Territorial Defense Forces. The Territorial Defense Forces, as a part of the armed forces of Ukraine, can and is obliged by the law to provide this access to the legal aid in the area of active battles or in the so-called gray zones, or depending on how it is worded in the legislation. So this initiative by the legislator was in April last year. What was the legislator thinking about when they vested those duties in Territorial Defense Forces, this task? Well, it's unknown because the explanatory notice does not contain any reflections in this regard. But I have to say that the command of the Territorial Defense Forces, when they get the report from the servicemen who are advocates or lawyers, so when they got the report with analytics, they took all the necessary steps within the legislation framework and using all available resources. I mean, like the chief of staff, for example, they're in charge of the civil-military cooperation, and by joining of those mechanisms, the legal ones which are identified for the armed forces of Ukraine, this is how they implemented or started implementing this program. Can you please place the microphone closer to your mouth so we're hearing you better? I apologize. I was speaking quite loud. So this program is in progress. The communication is going on between the government authority, the Center for Free Legal Aid, and the way it is now possible in a legal way, this work is going on. And obviously, according to the Article 19, the state authorities should work under the procedures contemplated by the law, and this is where we were saying that we have a gap. So those are the problems that we should pronounce now. The Territorial Defense Forces is the state institution, a military institution, which takes things twice as serious. I mean, in terms of fulfilling those obligations that are not strictly stipulated by the government. The first problems that we have to pronounce, that the legislator should face this topic and to make necessary amendments. For example, the legislation on advocates institution, there should be a serious discussion about this. Those amendments were made sporadically, and the command of Territorial Defense Forces as a special corps, the specifics of the Territorial Defense Forces is because apart from the military legislation like manuals, they are also regulated by the special law. So this is the specifics of the Territorial Defense Forces. They have a humanitarian function which includes the provision of legal aid. Well, it's clear, but still I'm having a question. What should be the track? Is it a gray zone or not a gray zone? I have a need. This need should be communicated to them, and they should have understanding. Where should they go? To whom should they go? Should they go to the commander? Can you give me a person who will help me to submit the report or application? Or how is it happening in practice? Look, the way it happens in practice, the way it happens in life, the Territorial Defense Forces obviously do not supersede any other authorities, and where they can fulfill their work, they do to the extent stipulated by the regulatory documents. So we're talking about the zones where people have a limited access to government services. Sometimes people are limited even in access to the means of communication, and there is nobody but military there. So there is no such a big problem whom to address with this problem, because there is no other people than military there. So thus we undertake this responsibility. In the army we understand there is certain functional segregation. Who does what? Putting it in simple words, the area of cooperation with the civilians for any issues. The regulations stipulate or identify the specialists of the CIMIC departments for those tasks. So one of their tasks is communication with the civilians, identification of the needs of the civilians, and their satisfaction of such needs in case possible. So if we talk about the necessity to provide some consultations, Alexander mentioned it right, that our cooperation is in our ability to provide a specialist with the knowledge. There is the agreement with the coordination center about the training of our specialists. The resources of coordination center has a number of written consultations that can be used, and apart from that there are different other information materials. So we view such a specialist as a para-lawyer who provides the vitally necessary legal aid in the fields, first by informing people of their rights and obligations, rights to some services. If we're talking about some remote communication with the specialists, including the specialists from the coordination center or non-government sector, there is also such problems sometimes in such places, as there is no communication of any kind there. So thus, through the headquarters, where there are at least Starlinks, people can transfer some information and receive some primary legal consultation. And yet there is yet another problem in this area. We stay in different places. For example, in the famous heroic city of Bakhmut, when it was undesirable for the civilians to stay there, we were facing the problem when there are active battles going on in the city, but at the same time there are civilians, and our communication with those civilians, it kind of led us to interesting reflections, which we confirmed empirically. Then the problem of evacuation is related mostly to the fact that people are not informed. They don't even know that beyond their city they are needed for somebody, that they have some rights, that they are entitled to some legal aid from both government and non-government institutions. And this is what constrains them, what holds them back from evacuation, including with their children. Children end up in the battle zones. Their parents do not understand what to do. They're under stress. They are in the middle of the warfare. They hide in a cellar. For them is the zone of the maximum safety, and they're afraid to go anywhere. They don't have understanding of what they are supposed to do in some strange lands. But the territories under Ukrainian control are not a strange land for them. We have to accept those people here regardless of their opinion, and they are exactly the people we are fighting for. So such information about their option that they can use for the legal aid, sometimes it's vitally important, vitally necessary for those civilians who end up in those battle zones. Okay, then the question is as follows: how to make sure the system works more efficiently so that we don't have a lot of windows, how to do it in a way that there is one centralized window, and we have to amend the legislation in some way if there are certain amendments necessary. So which exactly, and how it will help, how to make it work more efficiently. In my opinion, it's not about the multiple windows. Multiple windows is like when there is one service and you have to report to a number of institutions for this one single service. Here we work as a free legal aid organization, as a government organization, along with the non-government organizations. So we make sure the people can get this legal aid one way or another, and in no case, in my opinion, there will be a need to make some joint windows. So those parallel processes are normal. Well, in fact, it's a synergetic job by a number of human rights organizations. If human rights organizations, they have their proper resource that they can use to provide the consultations or represent people in the course, it's wonderful, they can go ahead and do it. If there is no such resource in an organization, such organization may link a person to the free legal aid system, the regional center, the Bureau for Free Legal Aid. We work with the non-government organizations. For example, if a person who applies to a center for free legal aid, they are not entitled to the free legal aid according to the legislation. We link them with other organizations which provide legal aid on a paid basis. So this is the synergetic work. Again, I may add a little bit. So here we're talking about what is presented now. It's the joint decision of the command of the Territorial Defense Forces and the Center for Free Legal Aid, which does not supersede, but in parts stipulated by the legislation, they see how the government, the state, can fulfill their duties. And I was mentioning it already, it requires more clear regulation. Since now we're talking not only about the colleagues from our sector, we're talking about the obligation of the state. The human rights organizations, they were and they continue working, and they will help, they will support where the government cannot make it. They will pick up. But do we understand? Like we identify the areas of responsibility or what? No, it's a very sensitive thing. No, I was trying to stay away from this system. The processes are going on right now, but those processes should be aimed at solution of those issues that really exist, and not a solution of some situational tasks. We have very specific obligation by the government, and all the government actors should be regulating it. For the time being, now is the Center for Free Legal Aid and the command of the Territorial Defense Forces who deal with it. Do we have questions on the floor? Good morning, it's Svetlana Tkachuk, Ukrinform. I have rather not a question, but Mr. Alexander said that the legal aid covers not only civilians but also the military. But can you please tell us what are the most frequent problems that the military are facing now? What are the problems that surfaced as a result of the war? Well, let's divide it in two parts. First of all, we're talking about the criminal violations, and we're talking about the social issues of the military. So talking about the social issues of the military, it's a simple story. For example, the rules for arrest of the accounts. Many people are facing the problems that they were able to use about 100,000 hryvnias from an arrested account, and starting from May this amount decreased to 13,400, and it's most frequently asked question now because people don't understand what to do and how to do. So there's a lot of questions about, for example, the divorce, material support for a child. As to those are the most frequent questions. As to the criminal liability, well, most statistically significant is the leave without permission, but sometimes the military, they just are not aware of the criminal liability for this or those actions. So on one hand, the legal education is needed there, but on the other hand, we provide them protection, we provide them defense in the criminal proceedings, and there is a huge number of other issues related to the reports, for example, how to submit a report for leave, for vacation. And we get a lot of applications, a lot of requests like that, and cooperation, coordination with the Territorial Defense Forces, it will allow for such legal education work so that the people don't come to us for the free legal aid, so that they are able to solve these typical situations in their units. If nobody has any more questions on the floor, I will have my last question. So for what I understand, there is already a practice of coordination in place. Now you've come here with a vision, with understanding where it should be moving. So the question is, as soon as we reach this understanding where we move, so when it will become a permanently normally working mechanism. Well, talking about the documenting of the mechanism, so we were about to sign a memorandum on Friday, but we postponed that term. But talking about it practically, how it happens in life, we already cooperate. I didn't count it, I don't remember the number of missions that territorial defense units were going on missions in the gray zone. They were getting requests from the civilians for legal aid. They were processed by their lawyers. They handed over those issues to our lawyers, and our lawyers provided legal aid to the people. Sometimes, for example, about the destroyed property, how to receive a copy of the property title. In some situations it was a different issue, so the coordination was already in place. This mechanism of cooperation is being put on paper now. I mean, it's been processed as regulations, so there is already a structure, and I don't think that it will undergo some changes in future. Well, it's clear. Thank you very much for coming here with this very necessary initiative, because we really understand that there is need to cover those legal needs, and I want to thank the Territorial Defense Forces to get involved in this very important initiative. Our work will continue in about 7 minutes, and we will be talking about the diplomats. See you shortly.